This company just took their most iconic brewer. They made it brew better coffee. They made it more durable, and they made it $100 cheaper. So why does it feel like Ratio took a risk with this upgrade? The answer to that tells you something very interesting about different categories of things that are important to different people. This is the Ratio 8 Series 2. It was sent to me by 8 Ounce Coffee here in Canada. They deal all kinds of coffee stuff. And before we talk about anything that is new with this coffee maker, you need to understand what the original 8 was, because in many ways it was a little bit more than just a coffee maker. It's been in our equipment rotation for a long time, and I just think that the 8 is one of the most beautiful batch brewers ever made, hands down. Lots of hand-blown borosilicate glass, real walnut accents, handmade in Portland, Oregon, and it brews great coffee as well. You know, this isn't necessarily true for every piece of coffee equipment, but the 8 is a coffee brewer that just gets noticed in a really good way. You know, people come over and when they see it, it just grabs your attention and you just kind of look at it and you're like, oh, what is that? Is that a coffee maker? That's so cool, you know? And it really is cool. It's easy to use, and it's just a really nice premium piece of equipment. And for 10 years, the Ratio 8 Series 1 has really been about that. It's about more than just the cup of coffee that it makes. It's about the experience of making a nice pot of batch brew. You know, it looks good, it smells good, and it tastes good. And whether you're using it or whether it's just sitting there on the counter, it's something that feels very intentional in the way it's put together. So when you make a change to something like that, there's going to be some risk. And the Series 2 actually changed quite a bit with the way it's put together and works. So you end up asking the question, when you improve a lot of the things that you can actually measure about a machine, but you also change some things that are maybe a little bit harder to measure, which version is actually better? Let's start by looking at some of the highlights, because there is a lot of them. The Ratio 8 Series 2 makes a pretty drastic change to the basket. It uses a brand new double-walled stainless flat bottom basket. The previous 8 used a conical basket, which did work well enough, but conical brewers tend to be a little bit more finicky overall than flat bottom brewers. Flat bottom brewers will give you more consistent performance and a more predictable, high quality result. The new brewer on the 8 Series 2 uses standard Melita filters and sits on top of this nice smoked glass carafe. And for me, the change to the flat bottom dripper on the 8 Series 2 is probably the single biggest performance improvement to this. You know, the Ratio 6 uses a flat bottom brewer as well, and a lot of people actually preferred the performance of that coffee brewer to the original 8. So they've taken a similar approach here with a flat bottom dripper, just made in double wall stainless instead of plastic like it is on the 6. They've also included 2 brew modes. Both of the brew modes leverage what's called a bloom. And what that means is putting a little bit of water on the coffee and letting it sit there and saturate. Now that infuses the coffee with water and allows for a more complete extraction throughout the entire rest of the brew. And the 2 brewing modes, this is a big improvement on the 8, actually use different sized blooms. The full pot brewing mode blooms with about 190 ml of water. And that's a good amount if you're using the full basket size. And the half pot blooms with about 90 ml of water. So I'm using a 40 gram dose in this. I filled the water reservoir up to the number 4. I measured it out ahead of time, so that's about a 1:17 ratio, and it bloomed with about 90 ml of water, which is exactly what I would do if I was doing a manual brew of that size. So that's a big improvement over the original 8, which only had 1 bloom cycle. The way you toggle between the 2 different ones is if you want the full pot, you just do a quick press, and if you want a half pot brew, then you hold it for 3 seconds and it will trigger that shorter, smaller bloom. The water reservoir on the original 8 was all this hand-blown glass kind of assembly. They've made the water reservoir on the 8 Series 2 out of Triton. However, the hot water path is still made on the Series 2 out of borosilicate glass. There is also this drip tray, which you use to kind of put the dripper onto this drip tray when the brew is all done, and this little lid for the glass carafe here. And then there's the price. The original 8 cost about $900, and the Series 2 comes in at $799, $100 less than the Series 1. So you get an upgraded product at $100 less, which, when does that ever happen? And then there's a coffee, which also is great, by the way. Let's give this a taste here. One thing I always do when I'm making batch brew is I give it a little stir just to homogenize the brew a little bit. And let's see how this came out. Now that is a tasty coffee. This is a natural Brazilian from Hatch. Excellent. So if that's all there was to the story, this would be the easiest recommendations I ever made. It's one of my favorite batch brewers. It's got more features, it tastes great, and it costs less money. But it's also a little bit more complicated than that, mostly just because of how the original 8 was approached. The original Ratio 8 used a cast aluminum painted body, and the body on the Series 2 is now this matte finished BPA-free copolymer plastic. Now, that might sound like a downgrade, when you just kind of hear that. But something about the original 8 that if you go digging for a little bit, you'll find is, see the steam right here? When you have this under here, even with this insulating cap over the dripper, there still is going to be a lot of steam coming up and around this thing. And this was true on the original 8 as well. And with a lot of those painted metal parts, this steam would make the brewer a lot more prone to oxidization and ultimately degradation. So this is a more durable, really, finish. I think some people may not love that it's a plastic now instead of metal, but it is more durable. The water reservoir cap up here is still made of metal. It still feels super heavy and beefy. This was one of my favorite touch points on the original 8, and it is on this as well. It feels just as heavy. It's only painted on one side now, but it still is a really nice touch point. The reservoir is another area. They switched from glass on the Series 1 to plastic on the Series 2. And again, I'm sure that's one of the ways that they helped bring down the cost, but also those glass reservoirs were very prone to issues. It was a complicated part. People would very commonly have issues with them and they would need to go into service. So you would send them off to Ratio in Portland. They would need to spend time servicing them. You would be some time without your brewer. And even though their support was fantastic, it was a big hassle. There are other internal components as well that were particularly problematic on the 8. A lot of people had issues with them. A lot of people complained about them, and they've been redesigned and are a lot more durable on the Series 2. So while some of the material choices may kind of strike you in the wrong way, there is a logic to them wanting to provide a more durable product. So it's a bit of a give and take. And, they haven't really hidden this, which I think also is good. Mark Hellwig, the founder of Ratio, he did a whole write-up on all the material changes with the Series 2, why they made them, and I'll link to that down there in the description. So while I could see takes on both sides of that, I think that the transparency there on the changes is good. And overall, I would say when it actually comes to the Series 2, it still definitely feels like a premium product. The wood accents are still there. The things that you're actually touching on a daily basis, they don't feel hugely different. And the performance is actually improved even from the original 8. And I do think that whatever you think about the material changes, the Series 2 will be a coffee brewer that has a little bit more longevity to it. The oxidization risk with the Series 1 was real, and it couldn't always guarantee that that wasn't going to happen. I think that issues like that, issues with the internals, are less likely to happen with this version of the 8. Now, one other change that Ratio has written about is they've moved the manufacturing from Portland to China. Now, whenever a company is manufacturing at a factory that isn't their HQ, I always ask questions about what that manufacturing looks like. In the case of Ratio, it's the same factory that they've been partnering with on the Ratio 6 since 2019 and on the Ratio 4 since the 4 came out. So there's a long relationship there with this particular factory, which is a really good thing. I didn't get any info from Ratio on third-party labor audits or that type of thing. And people from HQ typically visit the factory at least once a year. They do have a labor rep there who they hire who is on the ground at the factory. The Ratio team did a write-up on these changes too, and I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. I think when it comes to the materials and the manufacturing, there's an emotional reaction there to something that was made in Portland. It's very romantic. It's all made using all metal and glass. And there's something in you that feels like you don't want to give that up. And I think that that is something that is fair to name, you know? But the reality of it is the changes that they made have made the 8 both more competitive in terms of price, which is good, and a more robust and resilient product, which is also good. But none of that actually matters unless the coffee is great as well. So let's talk about the coffee. You know, I really like the Series 1 Ratio 8 as a brewer. You know, anytime I have it out, I just feel like this is something that adds to my living space. It looks good. It smells good when it's brewing. Sarah doesn't complain that it's, you know, confusing to use or too geeky or anything. It's a one-touch brewer, really. It's really nice. But there was always something in me that was like, you know, I really like that flat bottom brewer that the 6 uses. So I was kind of always of two minds about it. You know, I liked the way that the 6 brewed coffee, but I actually liked the form factor of the 8 a lot more. And now I feel like with the Series 2, I actually get both. You know, the flat basket just provides this nice, rich, consistent, clean result. On top of that, with the Series 2, even just the addition of that one extra bloom cycle. When I want to make only half a pot, I don't want to make a full pot, you know, I don't feel like I'm shortchanging the brew. Now, one other brewer that I want to mention that's gotten a lot of notice in the last couple of years is the fellow Aiden. And I do want to talk about that for a minute because it offers a ton of features at a lower price than the Series 2. And depending on what you value, you might say, why would I ever consider a Series 2 when the fellow Aiden exists? And the fellow Aiden is a really nice brewer. It's really flexible. You can program it to do basically anything. It's connected, and it does have a minimal, sleek aesthetic as well. So what delineates these two brewers? And I think really it just comes down to the fact that they are in a little bit of a different category, you know? The fellow Aiden is an ultimate Internet of Things brewer. You know, you can customize everything. You can download recipes. You can share recipes. You can switch out different baskets. You have very precise control of the temperature. The downside of a brewer like that is that it can be complicated to use. And as much as there's a geek factor in me that I love brewers like that, I've also seen people get an Aiden and be confused by the features that it has and not been able to immediately get the cups that they wanted. Brewers like the 8 are more simple. They're more streamlined, they're simple to use, and they keep you in a sandbox that maybe you can't get them to do all this wild and crazy stuff, but the lane that they function in generally gives you delicious cups of coffee. I also find the material choice on the Series 2 to be a little bit of a higher caliber than on the Aiden. I think overall, if you want to be able to control every little thing, then the Aiden is a great brewer. If you want a smooth, simple, streamlined user experience, then that's kind of the sweet spot for the 8. Now, a really quick practical note on the 8 Series 2, you know, this is a glass carafe, so it's going to lose heat. And if you want to get a thermal carafe, that's going to be about $100 extra. So just something to bear in mind, depending on how quickly you go through a pot of coffee. You know, this surface right here isn't heated. You know, I don't love heating plates on batch brewers. I find that they degrade the taste of the coffee. So if you want to hang on to a pot of coffee for a lot longer, would recommend considering the thermal carafe. And you do need to get the one from Ratio because there's a magnet on the underside of all of these that prevent you from turning on the machine accidentally. Overall, like I said, I'm a fan. I love the simplicity. I love the design. I love the way it looks, smells, tastes. It's all good. A couple little quirks that I have. One, the cable back here. I see what they've done. I didn't really like the cable that came with the Series 1 because it stuck out straight in the back. And if I wanted to have my coffee brewer flush against the wall, it was tricky to do that. They've made this an L bracket, which is basically what I wanted with the Series 1, but depending on which side of the machine your outlet is on, the cable might be facing the wrong way. So I really feel like I'm nitpicking on that one, but I'm going to mention it. Also up here, this thing, It is very easy to have it in here where it doesn't totally just slide down into its finished position and it ends up kind of sticking up like this a little bit. It's kind of minor, but I didn't really find that with the Series 1. And these marks here on the side. Number one, I like that they added more of them and they actually put the number on it. Depending on how you want to set up your ratios and different doses of ground coffee that you may be using, the actual line may not be totally in the right spot, but I think if you're wired like that, you kind of know enough to weigh out your water and weigh out your coffee separately. And honestly, if you just fill it up to the line, you're probably going to get a good result. So again, I kind of feel like that's a bit of a me thing. And all the other changes are kind of have their good and their bad. So I think what I would tell a friend is if they're considering their first batch brewer and they're looking at the 8 and they think it's cool and it feels like a lot money-wise because it is a premium price tag on this thing. I think that there's nothing wrong with looking at a ratio 6. It's got a couple extra plastic components, but it still has that minimal streamlined user experience and it brews really, really good coffee. It's also more accessible from a price standpoint at $360. So I think that if you just want to get into a premium level brewer that does a fantastic job, the Ratio 6 is a recommendation that I like making now. If you want that extra luxury feel, you like the way the 8 looks, these things are on your counter, sitting there not being used for a lot more time than you're using them. So I'm a real proponent that our coffee gear should look good and it should feel nice having it in our space. And if that is something that is important to you, by all means, the 8 delivers, both in the cup and in the experience. And if you've been actually looking at an 8 for a while, and you haven't jumped in and now you're thinking about it, but maybe you have mixed emotions about it, there's several ways that you could think about that. I get that there is a feeling of wanting to hang on to that hand-built Portland vibe. There's something cool about that. There was also a shadow side to that. There was reliability issues. There was long service times, higher cost. In some ways, I feel like this brewer has actually grown up a little. The Ratio team did make a lot of changes to try and make these things a lot more durable than they were previously. I think that the brewing capabilities are better. I think that the basket they're using is better. Is this still a lot of money to spend on a coffee brewer? Absolutely. Do you have to spend this amount of money to get a great cup of coffee? Absolutely not. But the 8 is unique in how it's positioned. Now, I want to hear what you think. Where do you stand on the changes between the Series 1 and the Series 2? Would you consider a coffee maker like this? Or is this all just a bridge too far? Let me know in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.